What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the Very Blessed podcast. My name is Derek.
My name is Kayla.
And we are the Berries. So today we are going to conclude our mini series about the top 2 reasons that marriages fail. Last episode, we talked about finances. And in this episode, we are going to talk about infidelity or adultery. We have a couple of definitions of adultery, but instead of reading those, I think that it's just best that we just go ahead and define it. And it's simply put, adultery or infidelity is the disloyalty or sexual contact with another person who is not your spouse. I've rated this video not for children. I've rated this video for adults. So I think all of us know as adults what is considered cheating and what is not considered cheating. And there's really no gray area when it comes to this. The reality of it is, when you have 2 people that are in an exclusive relationship with one another, it is that couple's responsibility to set those boundaries and to set those lines and set those limits as to what is considered adultery. But the simple definition of infidelity is sexual contact with someone else that is not your spouse. When we talk about infidelity, what comes to mind when you hear that word?
Well, cheating is the first word that comes to mind. Trust, untrustworthy is a big one too. I feel like when you cross that bridge, trust goes out the window in that marriage, in that relationship. And for the person that loses that trust, it's probably going to be hard to rebuild back that up or take down that wall and rebuild that trust to make your spouse trust you again. Now, there is counseling. People do go to counseling for it. They're like, somebody outside or a pastor can counsel in regards to those situations. But sometimes it usually, if it's somebody cheating, they just leave. That significant other, that spouse, just leaves the relationship automatically. Especially like if they get a prenup and it's in a prenup, they're out the door. Or just like in a marriage, usually 9 times out of 10, they don't want to work it out because that trust is out that window.
Yeah, and it's well within the opposing spouse, the person that was cheated on. It's well within their right to leave that relationship. And like you said, it's the trust part that becomes really, really difficult afterwards, because if you've done it once, what's to say that you're not going to do it again?
Exactly.
And attitude is another part of it. If you've done something and you're super remorseful about it, there's a big difference between being sorry for something and then repenting for something. So, repentance obviously is a Christian word that gets used a lot. But the big difference between just saying sorry, being sorry for something, and repenting, sorry just means you're sorry for the act, but that still leaves room for you to commit the act again. Versus repentance is performing the act, being sorry for it, but turning away from that behavior and changing the behavior. So I think that's a big deal. What do you think is the biggest reason? And there's really no wrong answer to this, but what do you think is the biggest reason as to why a spouse would step out of the marriage on another spouse?
Insecure, I feel like, is the biggest thing. Or the person is needy in a way, like needs that attention. If your spouse is not giving you attention, especially like like what I've heard is like when people have kids, kids come first, especially when they're babies, that intimacy might go out the window. And you get so caught up in life of raising your kids and just work around the house, work outside of the home, and then you just don't have that time for one-on-one. That's why I say, Derek isn't really 100% on board on this, but I say you're always supposed to take time for one another, that one-on-one, in regards to like going on those one-on-one dates. If it's just going to a movie, I just feel like at least the people that I know, that intimacy goes out the window, and that other person or that one partner doesn't feel loved, or there's no affection between one another, and then they go elsewhere. That's how I've seen it in situations where that does happen, when the spouse commits adultery, because that person just doesn't feel like that person loves them anymore. It's just more of like a roommate situation.
Yeah. We'll back up for a second. What do you mean I don't agree with one-on-one time? What have we done the entire time that you've been here?
I guess I should clarify. I mean, I still dating your spouse. Like me, like doing the whole still dating your spouse, of like going on those dates. That's how I put it, but I know we've had that conversation, but we're getting off topic.
We are getting off topic, but that's because I don't want people painting me as somebody that doesn't take my wife out.
I'm just saying, like,
I'm constantly outside with my wife.
No, I mean like dating, the concept, like the word saying like you still need to date your spouse. Meaning like that's how I say it, but like still going out, like doing stuff one on one, having that one on one time. We do have that, but I call it like still dating your spouse.
Okay, that's better clarification.
Sorry.
That she's wording it as we're still dating.
Yeah.
She has this running joke that she's still my girlfriend and she's still my fiance. She's graduated. She's my wife. I don't have a girlfriend. I don't have a fiance.
I was a friend, and then I became a girlfriend, and then I became a fiance, and now I'm your wife.
Yeah,
so I'm like,
you graduated.
I'm all those categories.
You used to be those other things.
I'm still all those categories.
You used to be those other things.
I had to get through one stage to get to the other one.
I don't have a girlfriend. I don't have
I mean, the
fiance.
most top one is your wife, your spouse, your significant other.
This is what I deal with. This is what I deal with.
I'm just saying, like, you do need to take that time in regards to that one-on-one, but getting off topic. But I just feel like I've seen it firsthand from people I've known, that, you know, that intimacy kind of goes out that window. And if somebody doesn't get that from the person that you know, made those vows with and had that commitment, and it's like, well, this person seems like they don't love me anymore, or they just don't want to spend time with me, I'm going to go find it elsewhere.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good kind of explanation, especially from a woman's point of view. Women tend to be more of the emotional ones in the relationship, versus with men, they don't tend to be as emotional, but they are more lustful.
Yeah.
So with men, I think the top reason as to why they cheat and step outside of the marriage is because of opportunity. Yeah. You know, when an opportunity presents itself and temptation presents itself, it is harder for a man to turn it down than it is for a woman. And this does have to deal with the maturity behind things. It's a well-known fact that women mature quicker than men do. And the other part of that too is, you know, men, we have this kind of alpha kind of mentality to where being stuck, I'm going to put that in quotations, in a relationship and then in a marriage that then is, you know, we go from a relationship, which can be long-term, but then a marriage, which is supposed to be lifelong. It puts a psychological kind of divide internally with a male, because all of a sudden, sometimes it takes 6 months, sometimes it takes a year. All of a sudden, they're like, oh man, this is forever. Yeah. This is the only person that I'm going to be with forever. And again, then an opportunity presents itself, and it's a lot easier than for a man to take advantage of that and do it, and then immediately feel remorse afterwards. They're not thinking through.
Yeah, or somebody, you know, go out, somebody stroking their ego of like, oh, okay, like I still got it. I still can, you know, get this person, get that person, and kind of light that fire again that used to be way back in the day.
Yeah, it's very, again, especially for males, that is something that they crave. So complimenting your spouse, you know, telling your spouse that, you know, that you're still in love with them, giving them those words of affirmation. It's all about what the love language is for the person.
Yes.
So there's some times where maybe that's not your significant other's love language. Maybe your significant other's love language is going out on those types of dates, or maybe their love language is simply cooking. There's so many different types of love languages that are out there, but whatever your spouse needs, that's why you have to know them well enough. Whatever your spouse needs, that's what you have to give to them to keep them from seeking that from other people, which I think is kind of the common thing here that we're getting at. People tend to seek out other people when they're not getting what they call needs at home. But that's something that we've got to also change, is calling, sexual urges needs, because they're not needs, they're wants. And when you are confusing needs for wants, that gets into a very, very dangerous situation. One quick verse that I did want to read here is one that I shared with you before we got on, and it comes in Matthew 5:27. Jesus says, "You've heard it said, you shall not commit adultery, but I tell you that anyone who looks lustfully has already committed adultery in his or her heart." Meaning, if you are looking at someone that is not your spouse in a lustful way, that is also considered adultery. The mere intent of committing adultery or fantasizing about adultery is adultery. So, as Christians, we're held to a higher standard. So, I'm not speaking to non-believers at this point. Again, we have non-believers that watch the channel and whatnot too, and I feel like they can take things from the channel that are helpful to them. And what I don't want to do is sit here and seem judgmental, because that's never the intent. That's never the way that I want that to come across. If you're in a relationship, and let me actually go a step further. If you're in a marriage that is open, that's not biblical. And if you're a non-believer and you're in an open marriage, hey, that's fine. That's your
choice.
That's your choice. 100% fine.
And you and your partner or your spouse, significant other, that is your choice. At the end of the day, there's no judgment. That's your choice. Everybody has their choice in life on what path they want to go, and there's no judgment at all.
Exactly. Now, if you're Christian and you are a devout Christian and you are a biblical Christian, you believe in the Bible and the Bible's teaching, that's wrong. The Bible, and it's very clear that a marriage is supposed to be between two people, not with other people involved. So that's what I'm getting at here. So again, if you have any reservations about what I'm saying, I apologize for that, but I'm not being judgmental. You really do. You have the right to choose however you would like to practice marriage. But practically, when we're talking about from a biblical standpoint, Jesus tells us that if you even look at the opposite sex, or someone that is not your spouse, I should say, in a lustful manner, that is committing adultery. That's not to say just looking at a attractive man or an attractive woman is committing adultery. Of course not. You're more than welcome to look at someone and even tell them that they're attractive. That's fine. The problem becomes when you become lustful for them, and you start having those fantasies about that person, and you start thinking, oh, what if I was to get to know him, or what if I was to get to know her, and you're a married man or a married woman. That's wrong. That's considered adultery.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's always between the two people that are in that agreement of getting married, and you're signing that documentation that we're together. One. But yeah, no, I don't disagree with that, because yeah, even if you're daydreaming about somebody, that is, I mean, in the Bible, it's considered adultery.
There are a few states, I'm going to read these off, where adultery is considered a misdemeanor. It's actually literally against the law. In Alabama, Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Kansas, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Wisconsin, adultery is typically considered a misdemeanor. However, in Michigan, Oklahoma, and some cases in Wisconsin, adultery is a felony. So, uh,
Hold on, let's clarify that. So that means if you get married in that state, correct?
Yeah. Correct. Okay. If you get married in that state and you commit adultery, you can be charged a misdemeanor or even a felony. Now, these cases are rarely prosecuted. However, it's a real thing. Kind of where I'm going with this is, we kind of talked about this a little bit off camera, because I've heard some people, when I've mentioned that, just say, well, that's ridiculous. How can I go to jail for cheating? But here's a conversation that we kind of had off camera. A law of the land. So this is something that you have no choice but to follow. And if you don't follow it, there's a consequence behind it. A law of the land is you can't steal. You can't go into a store, take something, and just walk out of the store. Well, sure, you can, but if you get caught, you're going to suffer the consequences behind that, which is up to a felony charge for taking something. Marriage is something that you actually agree to. You sign a legal document. You're accepting essentially the terms and conditions of being married, the rules and regulations of being married in that state that you're in. So if adultery is considered a crime in the state that you've signed that legal document, that marriage certificate,
basically take an oath that you literally have to raise your hand and say I,
yes,
and say your full name. I thought that was just something you see in a movie, but you literally raise your hand and say I, say your full name, agree to this marriage. Like, you're not being pushed into this marriage.
Exactly.
Like, somebody is not provoking you or anything like that. So it's a legal binding contract or agreement that between two people that are going to be considered as one.
Mm-hmm. So there should be no surprise if your spouse did decide to prosecute you for adultery. That, yeah, it's a misdemeanor or it's a felony. So for people that say, oh, well, that's not fair, so then it's fair for you to steal, which again is a law of the land. You agree with, I can't steal. I could go to jail if I got caught from stealing, but something that you actually agree to, not a law of the land, marriage, you're upset because you'd have to go to jail about that? Well, probably shouldn't cheat.
Yeah, exactly.
Unlike finances, cheating, adultery is something that is 100% controllable. Finances are not controllable. We can't control the cost of goods. We can't control the cost of gas. We can't control, the housing market. Right. I can control my own urges. You can control your own urges. So we have full control over whether or not we commit infidelity or adultery.
And then just also thinking from the other person's perspective, because I know for a fact the person that committed the adultery, if it was reversed and that happened to them, they would be probably all in arms and being like, how dare you? But you want to go and do it. That's the thing. Just thinking of that other person, that mindset, now you might have messed up their trust, in regards to any, if they can even build that relation back up, or future relationships that might work out better. But you're also hurting that person that you call your spouse. You made this legal document, this made this legit, like a marriage. You got to take into consideration to this other person. Like, it's not just you. You can't just think about yourself. You can't be selfish in a marriage, because it's two people. It's not one person at the end of the day. You can't think like that at the end of the day, because you're a couple. It's a union at the end of the day. It's two people. So you thinking like, well, that's ridiculous. No, it's not, because you are also dragging another person down with you, because you decided to go do what you wanted to do at the end of the day.
The next piece that I wanted to touch on just real quickly here is how two people would work past it. I think this is the hardest thing that any couple would have to face. is, you can get past the financial part because again, that's not your fault. You can get past parenting issues because again, not your fault. You can do the best that you can for your children, but it's ultimately then up to your children to decide what type of person that they want to be as well. So you have limited control over that. The big thing about adultery is you have 100% control over it. You choose whether you want to do it or not. So getting past it, I think the first thing is obviously admitting it, not hiding it, admitting it, and then showing steps as to how you're going to get past it by not just saying what you're going to do, actually do those things. Most adultery happens when the other person is intoxicated. Alcohol triggers the same part of the brain that lust or sexual arousement triggers. So when people are out and around people and they're drinking alcohol or any other type of substance abuse that they're doing, they're more likely to cheat on their spouse when they're in a setting where their guard is down and another person's guard is down, especially if there's been previous attraction between those two people. So admitting what you did, removing yourself from either the substance that you were using or the people that you were hanging around with, that's number one. What else, though, do you think for people that are trying to get past it, you think that they would have to do?
I would say repenting, also being remorseful and repenting, having that conversation as adults, like, okay, this happened. Why did this happen? Having that adult conversation of, okay, what's going on? Why? I feel like having that conversation will kind of get you past that first little hump, but then going on to getting the help that that person needs, either if it's a therapist or going to meet with a pastor, going to kind of talk out that stuff with somebody. But just having you, I mean, first and foremost, you have to have that adult conversation. You both yelling at each other and throwing blows and left and right is not going to work. But I would say definitely first sitting down, having that adult conversation, listening to one another, taking in and repenting and saying you're sorry, being remorseful, and then going to that step of, okay, what can we do to make this better? And then in some cases, usually the person that's hurt usually doesn't want anything to do with that person anymore. So it just really depends on that other person. But I feel like that first interaction needs to have that adult conversation. Yes, it's hard. I mean, there's plenty of conversations that are hard that you still has to be done at the end of the day. Might be awkward, you might be mad, just and just like in a really bad place, but making that effort of like, okay, I have to have this conversation with this person. I made that vow to this person, through good or bad, sickness and health, like, gotta have that conversation.
Yeah. God calls us to have a forgiving heart because of the example of Jesus, right? Jesus came to earth and died so that our sins could be forgiven. So, as hard as it is, you should always try. And again, we're coming from a Christian's point of view here. You should always try to work it out, even if there was infidelity. But the Bible's clear on this. If there's infidelity in the marriage, you're 100% fine to walk away from it if it's something you cannot get past. However, again, it's one of those situations where it's very hard, extremely difficult, but you should still try, make the effort. And if you can't get past it, or if the person's proven that they're not going to stop the behavior or they're just not remorseful, yeah, it's time to get out of that situation because they're not honoring you or your vows. So I think it's difficult when you have one person who is trying and another person who is not trying. And when you get to that point, it's just not possible to make things work because you need to put in effort.
Right. Yeah, that's I feel like that's another big thing. Like when somebody is already checked out, there's the only person that can get them checked back in is God. I'm sorry, at the end of the day, because you can't change somebody.
Yeah, God and themselves. So here's the thing, because God's never he's not a puppet master.
Yeah.
He's not going to force you to do anything that you don't want to do. So he can influence, but until you make the decision that you want to change, God's going to step back and let you make your own decisions, which is why he's such an awesome God, that we don't have to be controlled. We make our own decisions. We're just influenced.
Right.
Third parties are always a little difficult. Although I think this is something that's usually necessary as well. A third party, meaning, if it's a counselor, if it's a pastor, if it's a friend, the reason that this gets difficult and why it's usually better to try to go with someone that you don't know is because once your business is out there, then there's judgment that's going to come in. And other people just are not going to be as forgiving. Because again, once your business gets out there, it's out there, and then people are going to talk about you and make assumptions.
Yeah, and then they're gonna take sides, and then there it just doesn't go good at the end of the day, regardless what side they choose. And you shouldn't be two sides. You should be rooting for both of them and their marriage because it's between two people at the end of the day. Usually people just go straight to judgment and pick sides.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Is yeah, one person's going to take the husband's side, one person's going to take the wife's side, and it just like you said, it shouldn't be that way. You should be rooting for the marriage to succeed. We're all people, though. We're all human beings. We all make mistakes. So even when we hear that this person, maybe stepped out of on the marriage, yes, it's hurtful, and it's hurtful to family too, right? Because you don't want to see your family member hurt or your friend hurt, but you also want them to be happy, and you also want them to remain married and not have that stigma on them of, oh, my marriage failed. So I'm not going to sit here and say that you need to be a masochist and you have to take them back. You don't have to take them back. It's just the godly thing to do, to try.
Yeah, try to work it out.
Just to try.
Yeah.
But also, if you've went into it with very clear expectations, as we've went into our marriage with extremely, clear expectations that, hey, we are going to be faithful to one another. If either one of us step out on the marriage, then we're going to step out of the marriage, period. Yeah. And that's because we hold ourselves to higher standards. Not saying that we're better than anybody. No way. Not even close. We are human beings. We are human beings just like anybody else, but we just have an expectation of how this marriage should go. Are we always going to live up to the expectations? No, of course not. But there's some things that we have 100% control over. Adultery is one of those things we have 100% control over.
Choice. Exactly. At the end of the day. Yes. And having that conversation of, well, I remember we've had a lot of conversations before we even got married, even before we got engaged, about, what we want in life and what we want to build, how the future looks 10, 20, 30 years down the road for us as a union, or as, I mean, mind you, I didn't even know we were going to end up being married, but just having those conversations couple years back, before we even got married and got engaged, I feel like also definitely helped, because engaging what we want in life and what our future wants to be. And yes, sometimes things change, but also understanding, like, you and your spouse are able to change with the changes, in regards to that, because we are in two different states still. We travel a lot between both states, and having that communication, having that trust,
That's the first thing that somebody comes up to me and is like, "Oh, where's your husband?" They're like, "Oh, he's in Arizona." And they're like, "How does that work?" The first thing is God and communication at the end of the day, and having that trust. So I just feel like having those, just having a conversation, being an adult, having conversations, and
seeing where your partner wants to be in life, what you want out of life, if you guys have the same kind of goals, values, morals, all of that, I feel that it works out a little bit better in knowing your partner at the end of the day.
I think we're going to leave it there. No, that was excellent. I think that's a great place to leave it. I do appreciate everyone who has been tuning in. I think I said this last week when I recorded my last video, but I'll reiterate it just in case in case somebody hasn't heard it. In the last 28 days, we have had over 6,000 views on the channel, which is far more than what we've ever had. So thank you for engaging in the comments. Or sorry, thank you for engaging in the conversations with us. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, click the notification bell so you don't miss a video. But until next time, my name is Derek.
My name is Kayla,
And we are the Berries.
Berries.
God bless.
Bye, guys.